Good morning. I'm County Executive George Latimer, and we're here to talk about a very significant action that Westchester County has taken today in coordination with what many other counties and municipalities have taken, and it deals with the epidemic that we're all experiencing in the opioid crisis. We have an epidemic that is understood by everyone involved in the healthcare field, in the police law enforcement field, and those of us as everyday residents and neighbors. We've all gone to too many funerals of young people who have died, and people, in fact, of all ages, who have died from opioid overdoses. My next-door neighbor's young son, 18-year-old young man, a wonderful man, died 2 Christmases ago from an opioid overdose. And we're seeing this happening at every different level of society. There was a time when drug abuse and drug fatalities were seen as something that happened amongst the poor in our urban centers, but now it is affecting the wealthy, the middle class, the working class, the upper, every sort of economic and demographic cross-section of the county and of the country. And so today our effort, interdisciplinary between people with very different expertises, is to deal with the manufacturers and the distributors of the very drugs that have been the source of the addiction, and seeking to try to get what we think is only a fair return from those companies to offset the cost that this epidemic has engendered. This epidemic has represented not only the loss of life, but the cost and taxpayers and others that have to offset the treatment, the public education, the law enforcement efforts that have to go above and beyond our normal efforts in order to fight this. And we think that it's wholly appropriate for those manufacturers who've made the profit off of these products to now pay for that which their products have caused and created. We are trying to recover those damages through a lawsuit, which some of our individuals will talk about in some greater detail. The lawsuit, the complaint, will outline the history of how these defendants, these companies, have downplayed the risks that were associated with opioids such as OxyContin, Fentanyl, and Percocet, while aggressively marketing them. And in my private life, my professional life, I came out of a sales and marketing background in a different industry. And I understand the pressures of a salesperson trying to meet quota. I understand the pressures of trying to market a product or a service in order to reach a profitable goal. In quest of that effort, you do not look at the social costs of what you're doing. You only look at what your corporation requires you to do in order to hit your demand goals. In this case, human lives were at stake and taxpayers' dollars were at stake. We have had increase in county budgets for law enforcement, for emergency care, for first response or overtime, for Narcan training and prevention and treatment programs. In this particular action, there will be no cost to the Westchester County taxpayers, but we believe that when we look at the record, 124 opioid deaths in Westchester County in 2016, that this is the right move for us to make. We believe we're on the side of right, and we believe that along with all of the other jurisdictions that are taking similar action, coordinated and otherwise action, that there is a legitimate claim that should be satisfied by the court. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to introduce 2 particular individuals who are going to speak. We are joined today by our Deputy County Executive, Ken Jenkins, and the next speaker will be our County Attorney, John Nona. John?
Thank you, County Executive. This lawsuit will not bring back those who have died as a result of opioid addiction. It will not help people who have suffered losses bring back their loved ones, but it will hold those companies who have been guilty of marketing these drugs with false advertising, false claims, and misrepresentations and hiding information. It will hold them accountable for the financial losses that our county has suffered as a result of dealing with this epidemic and trying to assist our residents in overcoming these problems. I'm going to now turn it over to Paul Napoli, who's our outside counsel, who will be representing us in this litigation from the firm of Napoli Skolnick. They are extremely knowledgeable about these cases. They're experienced in prosecuting them on behalf of other counties, and we are very happy that they will be representing us in this case.
Good morning. Today, Westchester County made an important step in filing a lawsuit against the manufacturers and distributors of opioids in New York State. Our hope is that this lawsuit will not only help stop the dying, stop the addiction, but also help recoup the costs in the past that the county has expended in dealing with the problem, and help the county in the future for the costs that are going to be needed to deal with this problem, which will go on for years and years, just from what's happened in the past. The action will be coordinated with other New York counties. As of today, about 60 counties in New York of the 62 counties have retained counsel, and all those cases are now coordinated in Suffolk County before Judge Gargiulo. I'd like to introduce founder and president of the Harris Project, Stephanie Marcassano.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I stand here as a mother whose son died at the age of 19 by accidental overdose. My son self-medicated an anxiety disorder and ADHD. I think about what would have made a difference for Harris and for our family, and because of our experience, I focus on the relationship between mental health and substance misuse and addiction, which is known as co-occurring disorders. As an advocate and someone who is truly living a nightmare, the silver lining for me is that I live in Westchester County, where there is much support for turning the tide on this epidemic and changing outcomes through innovative solutions. When it comes to opioids and prevention and our young people, there are critical things that they need to know. First, there needs to be an understanding about the relationship between mental health and self-medication and the importance of getting the right help and support along the way. There also needs to be understanding about the risks of legal prescriptions for things like sports injuries or wisdom tooth removal, and understanding how quickly a young mind can turn to an addicted mind or who can then become struggling with mental health issues. The same thing goes for experimentation. One thing that really needs to be made perfectly clear is that there is no such thing as experimentation with a 25-year-old and under and opioids. And as it relates to treatment, this is a unique opportunity because states across this country are spending millions and millions of dollars on treatment programs that aren't really working. We hear about people who go into treatment 10 or 15 times, come out and relapse, and it starts again. This is an opportunity to look at where treatment is going wrong. Opioids may be the start, but for many people there are other things going on underneath. I see this epidemic up close and personal every single day. I hear from parents and young people who are desperately seeking help and support. And I stand here today to give a personal face to this crisis. And now I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of Health, Shirlita Ambler. Dr. Ambler?
Thank you. So as you all know, Westchester and our nation are in the throes of a new public health crisis, the opioid epidemic, which last year killed more of our people than motor vehicle accidents. I think you'll hear all kind of statistics, but that statistic alone should get our attention. Prescription painkillers have actually overtaken heroin as the most common cause of opioid overdose deaths, and every measure must be taken to stop this dangerous trend. The reason that more overdoses occur from prescription opioids is simply because prescription opioids are very accessible. They are the most accessible form of opioids. And it is very important that we all remember that although pain medication may be very appropriate sometimes, it is incredibly important that we use the lowest effective dose for the shortest amount of time. I also want to remind people that they should never share their pain prescription with anyone else. When your doctor prescribes you a prescription as a painkiller, it is for you and you alone to take, and it should be taken only as directed. These pills can become very dangerous when you mix them with benzodiazepines such as Valium or sleeping pills or illicit drugs such as cocaine or heroin or alcohol, because all these things have one effect. They lower the body's ability to breathe, and when somebody dies of an overdose, they simply stop breathing. That's what happens. That's what kills you. So I think it's all very important to remember. And the last thing that I would say is that sometimes people think that, prescription painkillers are safer, so they may be looking for them on the street. They may be buying their their OxyContin, OxyContin on the street. But when you buy the painkillers on the street, you do not know what you're buying. These drugs may have been illicitly manufactured. They may contain fentanyl or other drugs that are extremely dangerous and put you at risk for an overdose. So I would really encourage people not to buy their painkillers on the street. And now I'd like to introduce Michael Ort, who is our Commissioner of the Department of Community Mental Health.
Thank you, Dr. Amler. Good morning, everyone. I'd first like to thank our county leadership, our county departments, and other organizations in addressing this most important topic of an opioid crisis. The Department of Community Mental Health has experienced the devastating impact of the opioid crisis. From the daily calls we receive from family members advocating for their loved ones for support, or the overburdened emergency response system that fill our crisis rooms and our emergency departments, to our over-inundated inpatient and outpatient services throughout Westchester County that are trying to provide immediate treatment for those in need. Furthermore, we continue to reach out and educate communities, coalitions, young people, as well as seniors on trying to prevent this epidemic from spreading. We also have seen the impact of the many lost lives in our county as well. The Department of Community Mental Health, with other providers, continue to really explore how best we could address the issue of stigma. 1 out of 10 people who are impacted by opiate addiction actually receive treatment. Looking at, as Stephanie Marcarzano said, evidence-based treatment models like Medicaid-assisted treatment or co-occurring addressing those issues, clearly there's a lack of. And also providing peer support to family members who are struggling with their loved one during this addiction difficulties. Pharma industry needs to be held accountable for the unnecessary costs incurred as a result of prescription opiate abuse, including the significant cost of treatment. SAMHSA estimates that $55 billion annually costs for health and social service costs each year, and an additional $20 billion for emergency department and inpatient care for the individuals that we're trying to support. We will continue to address this issue in the mental health, but clearly need the more adequate resources to provide the care that individuals need. I would like now to introduce Chief Hodges from the Westchester County Public Safety Department.
Thank you, Michael. Over the past 7 years, we've seen a huge increase in the use and abuse of opioids. We've also seen a rise in overdoses and overdose deaths caused by opioids. Opioids include prescription opioid pain relievers such as hydrocodone, OxyContin, fentanyl, and morphine, as well as the non-prescription opioids such as heroin and opium. We as the police work mainly on the supply side of the problem. Ample supplies of heroin and opioids are available. Those who do become addicted to prescription medications may also resort to using heroin. The purity of heroin is high and the cost is relatively low. The Westchester County Department of Public Safety has increased its staffing of its full-time narcotics unit, and we have also joined up with the District Attorney's Office to formulate an opioid task force that also includes officers from not only the county police, the DA's office, but Peekskill, Portchester, Croton, Yorktown, Yonkers, and Mount Pleasant. We also have personnel from the department who are assigned to the DEA Task Force and the DEA Diversion Task Force. The Diversion Task Force is responsible for handling those cases involving prescription medications that are moved toward illegal purposes. This problem knows no boundaries. It affects urban, suburban, and rural areas, as do the overdoses. There is collateral damage associated with heroin and opioid crisis. That collateral damage is also associated with crime that is caused by addicts and those who are trying to fund and fuel their addictions. We in public safety are also sympathetic to the people who are addicted to opioids, and we are working with the District Attorney's Office and health professionals to get the treatment that they need as an alternative to incarceration. The financial cost of our efforts and associated efforts by law enforcement to combat this problem have become very steep. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to the county executive.
We also have with us our Deputy County Executive, Ken Jenkins. Ken, you want to share some of your thoughts on this issue? Sure. Okay, very good. To summarize, the lawsuit effort is an effort to hold accountability where it belongs and to help offset financial costs that have been laid out. Whatever comes out of that process is subject to the legal process. John Nona, as county attorney, will work with Paul Napoli and his team to try to determine what is the best strategy toward either adjudication or settlement of the case. And as we find out what happens, should we reach that point, we'll be happy to tell you what will be the next step. But for today, that's the step of where we're filing the suit. And any of our colleagues here are welcome to answer any of your questions.
Can you say how much in damages you're seeking?
Paul?
Well, we're looking for a broad range of damages, and we're in the process now of working with the county to earmark the past costs associated and also the future costs, and we're working with the court to figure that out as well, and that's an ongoing process. So I couldn't give you a specific number, but it is significant, as you heard from each of the individuals who have spoken.
Can you give us a sense of how these companies intentionally misled the public about the dangers of these?
Sure. It is a long story, and it's different for the different types of defendants in the case. We filed the complaint this morning at 9 a.m. It's about 270 plus pages long. Spells out a lot of the details, and you could get a copy from Ms. Chiaffi. But generally, the manufacturers did what they tried to do was negligently market to doctors. They changed the story about science to try to expand the number of people that were going to be their customers. And so they started to market not just to people who had breakthrough cancer pain or people who were at end-of-life care, but they started to market to dentists and oral surgeons for when a child had their wisdom tooth removed. They started to market to people who had chronic pain. And so they went beyond the bounds in which these drugs were really meant for. So most people don't realize, but OxyContin is 10 times more potent than heroin. And so we all know growing up that our parents told us, you don't try once, you don't even try once heroin. And so after 3 to 7 days, that's enough to change a body and a mind to make it addictive and be addicted to the drug. So that's a concern. The second level of defendants that are being sued are the distributors, and they have the responsibility under the federal and the State Controlled Substances Act to know where the pills are going and to stop the sales where there's too many sales to individual pharmacy or an individual location. And we've all heard the stories, I'm sure, in the last 6 months of small towns. There's one in West Virginia, and it's a problem here also in Westchester County, where a large number of pills go to a community, more than the community realistically should be taking. So, for example, the other day in West Virginia, there was one small town of 4,000 who got 21 million pills in a given year. I mean, that's just more than the community can bear, and that should set up a signal to the distributors that something's wrong to alert the DEA, and that just wasn't done here. It wasn't done anywhere in the country, frankly.
Sally?
Yeah, can you explain how you're collaborating with other counties with the lawsuit you filed today or whatever? Is that just Westchester? I'm just confused on that.
So each of the counties has their own right to bring a lawsuit. And so in New York, there is a provision in the law that allows all the county's cases or any similar types of cases to be coordinated in front of one judge. And so all the counties, there was an order by the Office of Court Administration in this summer in August that had all the cases coordinated in front of Judge Gargiulo in Suffolk County. So as the case is filed, so here to this morning we filed in Westchester, it will get transferred for discovery to Suffolk County in front of Judge Gargiulo and then sent back here if it eventually goes to trial.
And you said currently there are 60 counties that have
There are 60 counties that have been retained, but it is all public record, have retained law firms around the country or in New York to pursue litigation. And I think about 75% of them are filed as of now or in the process of being filed.
Can we elaborate on the cost to taxpayers, the statement of not costing taxpayers? The filing doesn't cost, but will a future retainer have some type of payment associated with it?
No, you can.
Either
Yeah,
way.
this case is being handled on a contingency basis, so there's no legal fees being paid except out of the final recovery that the county may experience from successfully litigating this case to a trial conclusion or through a settlement. Obviously, there'll be costs, and the county will have to bear any costs of the case, like the filing fee and things like that. So,
What do you think your chances of success are?
I will let Paul answer that.
We feel that they're very good. You know, when you read the complaint and you look at the facts, it tells a very good and terrible story about what happened, and we feel comfortable in bringing the lawsuit. Otherwise, I don't think the county attorney or ourselves will pursue it.
But we've done our own due diligence and reviewed the materials that Mr. Napoli and his firm have gathered in this lengthy complaint, which spells out chapter and verse how these companies not only falsely advertised, but I believe the evidence will show that they hid and concealed the fact, the addictiveness of these products when they were being sold. They knew how addictive they were and suppressed that information in order to sell more of them.
John? John, you had a question?
Yes. How many days does it take for a person taking these types of drugs to become addicted to them?
Dr. Amber, I guess.
Well, unfortunately, no one can tell you the answer for that. If we knew who who taking an opioid would become addicted, we obviously wouldn't give that person. Some people take opioids for pain for many years. The vast majority of people who take opioids do not become addicts. But for some reason, some people do go on to develop opioid use disorder, and there's really no good way for doctors to be able to tell who that person's going to be.
Why are these drugs, you feel, still being prescribed?
Well, I mean, there are legitimate reasons. People have legitimate pain. And as I said before, the key is that you should only use the drug in the lowest effective dose for the shortest duration of time. That's it. And so when people are on these drugs for prolonged periods of time, that really needs to be something that their doctor is closely monitoring, and there should be consistent efforts made to find alternative ways for them to learn to live with the pain or to deal with the pain or to resolve the pain. So other modalities need to be closely considered.
Just to add to Dr. Ambler, again, we know of some evidence-based treatments like Medicaid-assisted treatment, where we use various medications in addition to treatment, where people over time can gradually be integrated back in the community and working through this ongoing process. The reality is we need an expansion of Medicaid-assisted treatment to adequately serve the people who really do need this type of treatment in Westchester.
If successful, what would happen to the funds?
Well, we would look at doing exactly what the various department heads have talked about. The funds necessary for law enforcement for us to make sure that we have the right type of manpower and training and the ability to do the things that they do in terms of going after these drug rings, to do for public education in both the community mental health and in the public health area, the funds that would be necessary for them to be able to expand their efforts and their training. We would look at it as part of whatever a final settlement might be, make some decisions. We would do that in cooperation with the Board of Legislators, and it would be part of a public dialogue that everyone would see. Very similar to what happened 20 years ago when there was a settlement with the tobacco companies, and there was an understanding of how that money was to be used, how much of it went for which purposes, and was all part of a public discussion and debate.
I think that settlement took quite a long time. Are you in this for the long haul? How long do you anticipate it?
We're in it for the long haul. We believe that the case is righteous, and we believe that we'll succeed at the end. Yes, Martin?
One thing on the fact that most of these opioids can be obtained legally through prescriptions. Is the argument being made that that they're fooling the health industry, the medical
Yeah, that is exactly what's happening. You know, they've changed the messaging to doctors, and they've taken a while to do it. And as they've done it, we've seen the opioids prescriptions go up and also the deaths go up.
Do you feel that doctors are receiving payments from the drug companies to overprescribe these drugs?
Yes, sometimes they are. There are key opinion leaders who were receiving substantial amount of monies to hand out misinformation. Just this week, Attorney General Schneiderman filed a lawsuit against one of the opioid manufacturers, Insys, and their chairman and president were indicted and going to trial in Boston for doing exactly that, bribing doctors and giving them dinners and large money awards so that they would prescribe the prescriptions to those people who didn't really even need it.
Other questions? Go ahead, John.
Any effort to take a look at medical doctors prescribing these opiates and their records and along those lines to perhaps prosecute them in the future?
Well, there's an element of that which involves the state government taking some action. The state legislature a few years ago passed restrictions on how much could be prescribed at any point in time, 7 days rather than 30 days. The electronic script program was an effort to try to avoid some of those doctors and or organizations that were identified as pill mills. But I think the enforcement of that will depend on some additional legislation that may yet have to come, and then also looking at it from the standpoint of the law enforcement community. The law enforcement community, and I'm sure Chief Hodges will reference this, works interdisciplinary between state police and local officials as well. And whenever it can be identified that point source might be a medical professional, then that would be pursued in the same way that it would be were it a group of people distributing, as you think of in terms of a drug ring. It would be a matter of law enforcement working throughout the different entities. John, do you want to highlight?
Yes, sir. There are, unfortunately, bad apples in all walks of life, and that includes physicians. Without getting into specifics, the DEA diversion task force that we work with has investigated, and there have been arrests made with physicians who have found it very profitable to sell these prescription medications for purposes outside of medical purposes. So unfortunately, these investigations are complex, and they require a lot of time and effort in order to develop the probable cause needed to make an arrest. But we have had some successful cases with that in this area through our people working with diversion. But they are complex, and again, not all doctors, but there have been some who have been associated with pill mills in this area, and even interstate movement of a tremendous amount of prescription medication. So in other words, New York may be doing something to curb it, but there'll be sources coming in from outside, and through our federal partnership, we've worked cases of that nature.
Just to add one thing. The people who have the responsibility to determine what doctors are overprescribing or the pill mills is really the distributors, and that's part of the problem. Even with the chief working hard and the DEA, a lot of the information they get is usually 6 months old. And the people who have the most recent information are the distributors, and they have not been doing their job, and that's part of this lawsuit.
I think the important thing to focus on when you summarize all of this together is Stephanie's story and the story of her son. And her son's story, the son of the neighbor, Hank McWilliams, young man who's my next door neighbor, that is the real reason why this is so important for us to address. Because it is not just about a settlement, it's not just about the lawsuit, it is about changing the practice in the pharmaceutical industry of what they're doing. And that message has to come through clear. And that is what we're standing up about today. We're saying that when you have a business in this country, and it's a profitable business, you have every right to function, but you must do it with public interest in mind. You have to think of Stephanie's son. You have to think of Stephanie and her family and her life that was ruined by the marketing of this product that found its way to her son. That's the single most important part of what we're trying to accomplish here, to end a practice that breaks families apart and takes lives. Thank you.